All right, let's talk about something that drives a lot of data teams absolutely crazy. How do you stop your data analysis from being just an interesting report and turn it into something that actually moves the business forward? We're talking about creating real value, not just fancy spreadsheets. Let's get into it. You've probably seen this happen before, right? A team of super smart analysts spends weeks, maybe months, on a project. They build this incredible model, but the final report, it just kind of sits there. It's this super common problem where you get these fascinating one-off analyses that, at the end of the day, don't actually change anything. And here's the thing. The solution usually isn't about finding a more complex algorithm or throwing more math at the problem. Most of the time, it's way simpler than that. It's about having a better plan, a really clear roadmap that guides you from a vague idea all the way to real-world impact. So, to really get what's missing, let's first walk through a super common and, yeah, pretty flawed way of doing data analysis. We're going to call it the bottom-up approach. And I'm willing to bet it's going to look pretty familiar to a lot of you. Okay, so this probably looks about right. It follows these 4 logical steps. You get the data and clean it up. You explore it to see what's in there. You build a model, and then you wrap it all up by telling a good story. I mean, on the surface, that sounds perfectly reasonable. What could possibly be wrong with that? Well, this quote right here, it really gets to the heart of the philosophy behind that process. The first step in any analysis is to examine the data set. See, it's completely data first. The entire journey starts with and is dictated by the data you happen to have, not the problem you're actually trying to solve. And that's what we call a data-driven pipeline. It literally starts from the bottom with the data and works its way up. It's fundamentally asking the question, hey, what interesting things can we find in here? But here's the catch. Interesting is not the same thing as valuable. Not even close. So where does this whole thing fall apart? The problem isn't really the steps themselves. It's what's missing on either side of them. You can think of it like it's missing 2 critical bookends that give the whole process a purpose and, a destination. The first missing bookend is right at the very beginning, business understanding. And look, this isn't just a quick chat with a stakeholder. This is a formal phase where you define the business problem, you figure out the goals, and you agree on what success actually looks like before a single person starts coding. Without this, you're like a driver with a full tank of gas, but absolutely no idea where you're going. And the second missing bookend? It's all the way at the finish line, deployment and operations. A great presentation isn't enough. For a model to have any value, it has to be plugged into the business somehow. That means you've got a plan for how it's actually going to be used, monitored, and maintained over time. If you don't, it's just going to break or slowly become useless. And you don't have to take my word for it. This is where the problem becomes crystal clear. If you map that common, flawed process against an industry standard like CRISP-DM, that's the cross-industry standard process for data mining, you see these huge, glaring gaps. Just look at the table. See how problem framing and operational integration are just completely absent from that typical process? And without those bookends, here's what you end up with. Technically brilliant models that either solve a problem nobody in the business actually cares about, or they're so disconnected from how things work that they just never get used. It is the perfect recipe for creating very expensive shelfware. Okay, so how do we fix this? We need to stop thinking about a simple, straight-line pipeline. We need to think bigger. We need a complete life cycle, one that's designed from day one to get us from a business need all the way to a solution that's actually up and running. Now, this is a much more robust framework. Let's call it the Strategic Data Analytics Lifecycle. As you can see, it's a whole lot more comprehensive. It correctly puts business framing right at the start and deployment and monitoring right at the end. It wraps all that technical work in the middle with the strategic context it needs to actually succeed. And this is absolutely critical. This is not a rigid one-way street. It's an agile cycle. If you're in the evaluation phase and you find a problem, guess what? You can loop back to modeling or even all the way back to data prep. It's built to be flexible, to respond to what you learn as you go. This right here, this is the fundamental shift in thinking we need to make. We're moving away from that bottom-up, data-driven question of, what can the data tell us? Instead, we're embracing a top-down, problem-driven mission. How can we use our data to solve this specific business problem? So, this all sounds great in theory, right? But how do you actually make it happen in the real world? Well, it really boils down to 3 key actions you and your team can take to build this better life cycle.
First up, you have to formalize the process. Make that business framing phase a mandatory gate. No project gets the green light without a project charter signed off by everybody that clearly answers these 4 questions. This forces everyone to get aligned before a single dollar is spent on the actual analysis.
Second, you have to plan and budget for the entire life cycle, not just the fun modeling part in the middle. This means setting aside real time and real resources for evaluating the model against the business goals and for all the engineering work needed to deploy and maintain the solution. Remember, the project isn't done when the model is built. It's done when it's working. And third, you've got to embrace agility. Don't try to build the perfect, final, all-singing, all-dancing model in one giant 6-month project. Instead, aim for what we call a minimal viable model. Get a simpler version working quickly. This lets you show some value early on, get crucial feedback from actual users, and it massively reduces the risk of spending months building the wrong thing. So here's the bottom line. The old way starts with data and basically just hopes for value to pop out. This strategic life cycle, it starts with a problem and architects a solution for value from day one. One is basically a fishing expedition, the other is engineering. Which leaves us with one final question to think about. When you look at the data projects in your organization, are they just a random journey through the data, or does your process make sure that every single trip has a clear, valuable destination?